Little thief. The words sliced through the hum of the Save Mart grocery store, sharp and venomous. Manager Brielle Hutchinson loomed over 8-year-old Claire Williams, her voice a cocktail of hatred and disgust. The small girl stood trembling, clutching a candy bar she had forgotten was in her backpack after buying supplies for school. She tried to explain, her own voice a fragile whisper. "I'm sorry. I forgot it was there. I can pay for it." But Brielle wasn't listening. She had already constructed a story in her mind, and this child was its villain. "Too late for sorry," she snarled, her fingers closing around Claire's arm like a vice. "This is what happens when parents don't teach respect." The entire store had become an audience, and what happened next was a chilling testament to the power of a mob. Most customers, instead of recoiling in horror, nodded in agreement. "Finally someone dealing with these kids properly," one man muttered. Another shouted, "Good for you, manager. They need to learn." Cell phone cameras were raised, recording every second, not to document an injustice, but to celebrate what they perceived as righteousness. The crowd, feeding on Brielle's aggression, grew louder, their voices a chorus of approval. "People like you," Brielle spat at the little girl, emboldened by the cheers, "need to learn some respect." Then it happened. The sharp crack of Brielle's hand connecting with Claire's face echoed in the aisle, a sound that sent the crowd into a frenzy of approval. The 8-year-old girl, who had only wanted to buy supplies for her science project, stood frozen. Her small hand rose to her stinging cheek as she fought a desperate battle against tears. "Little thief!" Brielle screamed again, and the customers applauded. The store erupted. "About time someone stood up," a voice called out. "They think they can get away with anything." A few flickers of dissent were quickly extinguished. Destiny, the teenage cashier, looked on in horror, but fear sealed her lips. Frank, an elderly stalker, shook his head in dismay, his disapproval drowned out by the roar of the crowd. They were no longer individuals. They were a single entity, a mob celebrating what they believed was justice. Comments flew through the air like poisoned darts. "Send this to the news!" Finally, a manager with backbone. But through the chaos, a woman's voice cut through the noise like a blade. Everyone turned. Walking through the entrance was an impeccably dressed black woman in a sharp business suit. Her face was not yet clear, but her posture, her gait, her very presence radiated an undeniable authority. This was a woman accustomed to command, a woman who didn't need to demand respect because she carried it with her. The energy of the crowd shifted, a ripple of uncertainty passing through them. But Brielle, buoyed by her audience, looked at the newcomer and made the single greatest mistake of her life. With a confident sneer, she declared, "Another one defending a criminal." The crowd murmured its agreement. Emboldened, Brielle threw back her head and laughed, a harsh, ugly sound that declared this woman was no threat to her. She had no way of knowing she had just assaulted the wrong child. She had just picked a fight with the wrong family. And the woman now standing before her? Brielle was about to learn, in the most public and ruinous way imaginable, who held the real power in that room. The crowd believed they were witnessing a victory. They had no idea they were about to see the most epic downfall in retail history. To understand the true magnitude of Brielle's catastrophic error, we must go back 3 hours, to the Save Mart corporate headquarters downtown. In a sleek boardroom on the 30th floor, Dr. Angela Williams was reviewing the quarterly reports that would decide the fate of thousands of employees. At 42, she possessed a quiet authority born from years of earning respect, not demanding it. She was the newly appointed CEO of Save Mart Corporation, and her journey to the top had been anything but conventional. Angela Williams had been born into staggering wealth. Her grandfather founded Williams Industries, a Fortune 500 company that valued her family in the hundreds of millions. She could have lived a life of idle luxury, but Angela chose a different path. Against her family's protests, she attended Harvard Business School on her own merit, graduating summa cum laude. Then, in a move that stunned everyone, she applied for a job as a cashier at Save Mart. Her office told the story of the woman she truly was. The walls were not adorned with expensive art, but with community service certificates and photos of her with employees from every level of the company. She had chosen Save Mart over the family empire because she wanted to build something of her own, to help working-class families access quality, affordable food. For 20 years, she had climbed the ladder, learning every facet of the business from the ground up. But the most precious object in her office was a simple framed photo on her desk, her 8-year-old daughter, Claire. After years of heartbreak and struggle, Angela had adopted Claire from the foster system. Claire was her joy, her purpose, the reason for everything. 3 hours before the incident, as Angela made decisions affecting thousands of families, she had no idea that her own child was about to face the very prejudice she had dedicated her career to fighting. Meanwhile, across town at Lincoln Elementary, Claire Williams was facing her own challenges. A brilliant 8-year-old with a passion for science, she carried herself with a quiet dignity. Angela had deliberately sent her to a public school, wanting her to understand the real world. But being the only black girl in her advanced classes often left Claire feeling isolated. That afternoon, her teacher, Ms. Rodriguez, praised her volcano science project. "This is exceptional work, Claire," she announced to the class. But behind the teacher's praise, Claire could hear the jealous whispers of her classmates. After school, Claire made a fateful decision. Instead of going to her after-school program, she decided to walk to the local Save Mart to buy the final ingredients for her presentation. Angela had taught her the value of managing her own allowance, so the little girl, counting her carefully saved money, walked into the store, her mind filled with nothing but excitement for her project. She had no idea she was walking into her own mother's company or what awaited her inside. At that same Save Mart, Brielle Hutchinson was having a terrible day that was about to become infinitely worse. A bitter woman of 38, she had managed the store for 2 years, spreading her misery to everyone around her. She berated Destiny, the 17-year-old cashier. She wrote up Frank, the 64-year-old stalker. She undermined her own assistant manager, David Chen, a young man far more qualified for her job than she was. When Claire Williams walked through the automatic doors, Brielle's gaze locked onto her. A small black girl in a neat school uniform carrying a backpack. In Brielle's twisted mind, a narrative began to form. "Bet her mother's on welfare," she muttered to herself, her prejudice painting a picture based on nothing but the color of a child's skin. "Probably sent her in to steal." With these poisonous thoughts swirling in her head, she began to follow the innocent 8-year-old girl, a predator stalking her prey. The stage was set. Claire, the CEO's daughter, was about to become a target of the very bigotry her mother fought against. And Brielle Hutchinson was about to learn that some mistakes don't just cost you your job, they cost you everything. Claire entered the store with the pure excitement only a child can feel for a beloved project. Despite her family's wealth, Angela had instilled in her a deep respect for money. In the science supplies aisle, the little girl carefully counted her crumpled dollar bills and coins. She picked up baking soda, then vinegar, then food coloring, doing the math in her head to ensure she stayed within her budget. She paused in the candy aisle, her eyes landing on a small chocolate bar. She debated with herself for a moment, recounted her money, and with the quiet maturity of a child taught responsibility, she placed the candy bar back on the shelf. But in that moment, as she rearranged her backpack to make room for her new purchases, the chocolate bar was accidentally knocked inside. Focused on her volcano, she didn't notice. Brielle, however, had been watching her every move. As Claire walked through the store, Brielle began poisoning the air around her, making loud, pointed comments to other customers. "These people need to watch their kids better," she said. Then louder, "Probably can't even afford what she's buying. Watch her use food stamps." The racist assumptions dripped from her tongue. "You know how they are," she added with a sneer, "teaching them to steal young." Some customers shifted uncomfortably, but to her delight, most nodded along. At the checkout, a few employees tried to offer a silent defense. Destiny, the cashier, whispered, "Student discount, sweetie," giving her a small break on the total. Frank, the stalker, murmured to David, "That girl didn't do nothing wrong. Been shopping here for months." David, the assistant manager, wanted to intervene but was paralyzed by his fear of Brielle's retribution. An elderly white customer, Mrs. Patterson, spoke up with courage. "That child is an angel. I see her here all the time, always so polite." But Brielle was on a mission. Claire paid for her items with her carefully counted money, thanked Destiny politely, and turned to leave. "Hold on there, young lady," Brielle called out. Taught to respect her elders, Claire stopped immediately. "Yes, ma'am?" Brielle demanded to search her backpack. Confused but compliant, Claire agreed. And that's when Brielle found the forgotten candy bar. The explosion was horrific. "I knew it, little thief!" Her voice rose to a scream. Claire finally realized her mistake. "I'm sorry, I forgot. I can pay for it," she said, frantically pulling out the rest of her allowance. But Brielle wasn't interested in a solution. She was interested in humiliation. "Too late for sorry," she snarled, grabbing the child's arm. "Where I come from, we don't tolerate thieves." "You're hurting me," Claire cried, trying to pull away. "Please, I have money." Then came the slap. The impact was so hard it sent Claire's science supplies flying, baking soda, vinegar, and food coloring scattering across the tiled floor like the shattered pieces of her innocence. The store fell silent. Destiny gasped. Frank stepped forward, his face a mask of righteous anger. "Lady, what is wrong with you? She's just a baby." Even David found his voice. "Brielle, stop, she offered to pay." But it was too late. The crowd was already cheering, and Claire, this small 8-year-old girl, simply stood frozen, her hand pressed to her cheek, her quiet dignity a stark contrast to the ugliness surrounding her. 20 miles away, Angela Williams was wrapping up her meeting when her phone rang. It was Lincoln Elementary. "Ms. Williams, Claire never showed up for the after-school program." Angela's blood ran cold. Claire was meticulously responsible. Something was terribly wrong. She immediately activated the family tracking app on her phone. The GPS placed Claire at the Westfield Save Mart. A cold knot of dread tightened in her stomach. She grabbed her keys and headed for the parking garage, getting into her modest Toyota Camry. She had always chosen to live humbly, a decision that was about to prove more important than she could ever imagine. As she pulled into the Save Mart parking lot, she saw it. A crowd gathered near the entrance, phones held high. A mother's intuition screamed that something was wrong. She walked through the automatic doors and into the heart of the chaos. The first thing she heard was a woman's voice screaming about thieves. The first thing she saw was a mob, their faces energized, entertained. She pushed through them with a determined grace until she reached the center of the circle, and then her world stopped. There was Claire, her baby, standing alone, her hand pressed to a red, swollen cheek, fighting back tears with a strength that broke her mother's heart. A rage unlike any she had ever known surged through Angela. But she was a leader, forged in the fires of corporate boardrooms. She didn't explode. She channeled that fury into an ice-cold calm. Brielle saw a well-dressed black woman approaching and made her final, fatal assumption. "Great," she muttered to the crowd. "Here comes another one to defend a little criminal." Angela ignored her. She went straight to her daughter, kneeling so her expensive suit touched the dirty floor. She gently examined Claire's cheek, her hands trembling with barely contained fury. "Are you hurt anywhere else, sweetheart?" she asked softly. Brielle, still playing to her audience, announced loudly, "Your daughter is a thief. She's banned from this store, permanently." Angela rose slowly. She turned to face Brielle, and the very air in the store seemed to crackle. Anyone with a shred of sense would have recognized the danger in the quiet steel of her voice. "She is 8 years old," Angela said, each word precise and lethal. "And you put your hands on her." It was not a question, nor was it a plea. It was a statement of fact, delivered with the ice-cold precision Angela had honed over 20 years of corporate leadership. This was the tone of a person accustomed to command, who expected obedience, who had never lost a battle that truly mattered. But Brielle, drunk on the intoxicating cocktail of her own authority and the crowd's adulation, was blind to the warning signs. "I don't care if she's 8 or 80, Brielle doubled down, playing to her audience. "Stealing is stealing, and I won't tolerate it in my store." The crowd murmured its approval. Someone shouted, "That's right, teach 'em young." Then, Brielle made it worse. "People like you need to teach your kids better instead of making excuses and playing the victim card." Angela's eyes flashed with a fire that would have terrified anyone shrewd enough to recognize it, but her voice remained perfectly controlled when she asked, "People like me?" "You know exactly what I mean," Brielle said, a smirk spreading across her face that the crowd adored. "Always playing the victim. Probably here to threaten a lawsuit now. Well, I've got news for you. I have corporate backing, and they're not going to side with people like you." She leaned in, delivering what she thought was the killing blow. "I bet you can't even afford a lawyer anyway." The crowd erupted in laughter and applause. They thought they were witnessing a victory. They had no idea they were watching a woman sign her own professional death warrant. Angela's response came with the unnerving calm that precedes a hurricane. "I'd like to see your security footage of this incident," Brielle scoffed. I don't have to show you anything. I'm the manager here, not you. Then I'd like to speak with your district manager. This sent Brielle into another fit of laughter, which the crowd eagerly joined. Good luck with that, lady. He's not going to side with someone like you over me. I've been with this company for years. That's when Angela drew her phone, and the world began to tilt on its axis. We'll see about that, she said, with a quiet confidence that should have chilled Brielle to the bone. Brielle noticed the phone, sleek, expensive, clearly the latest model. She dismissed it as a fake, or perhaps bought on credit the woman couldn't possibly afford. Nice phone, she sneered. Bet you can't even make the monthly payments. The crowd howled again, reveling in the humiliation. But then Angela began to make calls, and something in her demeanor started to poison the celebratory atmosphere. Her first call was brief. James, this is Angela. I need you at the Westfield Save Mart. Immediately, we have a situation. Brielle overheard and mocked her. Ooh, calling your friend James? What's he gonna do? Come down here and yell at me too? Angela's second call was to a different number. Security department. I need all footage from the Westfield store from the last hour sent to my office. Priority 1. Your office? Brielle shrieked. Lady, what office? The welfare office? The crowd ate it up, but a few people were beginning to shift uncomfortably. The woman's posture, the authority in her voice. It wasn't aligning with Brielle's narrative. Her third call. Legal. We have a situation at the Westfield location involving assault on a minor. I need a team prepared for immediate action. Now some of the employees looked nervous. David, the assistant manager, stared at Angela, a dawning horror of recognition on his face. Frank, the elderly stalker, nodded slowly, as if puzzle pieces were finally clicking into place. While Angela was on her calls, David approached her quietly, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and respect. Ma'am, I saw everything. The little girl, she didn't mean to take it. She tried to pay right away. Destiny, the teenage cashier, whispered to Angela. We're all afraid of her. She says terrible things to customers and employees who aren't white. Frank, who had seen everything in his decades of retail work, spoke loudly enough for everyone to hear. In my day, adults protected children, not attacked them. This is shameful. The tide was turning, the cavalry was coming, and Brielle Hutchinson, still basking in the glow of her perceived triumph, had no idea the world was about to end. The first to arrive was James Sullivan, the district manager. Normally a man of aggressive confidence, today James looked as if he was about to be physically ill, sweating through his expensive suit. Behind him was Patricia Hayes, the regional manager, a woman so high in the corporate hierarchy that most employees had only ever seen her picture. She looked panicked, as if rushing to avert a nuclear disaster. And behind her, Michael Torres, the corporate head of security, carrying a briefcase and wearing an expression that meant someone's life was about to be irrevocably altered. The moment that shattered Brielle's reality was not their arrival, but their behavior. All three of these high-powered executives, people who commanded absolute fear and respect, deferred to Angela as if she were royalty. Yes, Ms. Williams, right away, Ms. Williams. Whatever you need. James Sullivan, the district manager who normally treated store managers as specks of dirt, approached Angela, almost bowing. Ms. Williams, I am so sorry. Please tell me how we can fix this. The crowd grew silent, confused. But Brielle, still unable to read the room, marched up to James. Finally, someone with authority, get these people out of my store. I've got a business to run. James looked at Brielle as if she had just spit on his mother's grave. Brielle, he asked, his voice choked with horror. What have you done? What have I done? She replied, indignant. I caught a thief and dealt with a difficult customer. I did my job. The silence that followed was absolute. Patricia Hayes, the regional manager, stepped forward, her face a mask of shock. In a voice barely above a whisper, she said, Brielle, you assaulted the CEO's daughter. Time stopped. The CEO's... What? Brielle's voice cracked for the first time. James Sullivan looked as if he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. Brielle, he said, I'd like you to meet Angela Williams, CEO of Save Mart Corporation. The words struck Brielle like a physical blow. All the color drained from her face. The crowd that had cheered her on moments before now backed away as if she were radioactive. Phones that had been recording her triumph were now capturing the most viral corporate takedown in internet history. and in the center of it all stood 8-year-old Claire Williams, hand pressed to her swollen cheek, watching the adults around her finally realize the gravity of what they had done. Angela Williams stepped forward, her quiet authority filling the sudden cavernous silence. "Brielle Hutchinson," she said, her voice calm, controlled, and utterly devastating. "Allow me to introduce myself properly. I am Angela Williams, CEO of the company you work for, the company I have dedicated the last 20 years of my life to building, the company where I started as a cashier, just like that young woman over there, working nights to put myself through business school." Brielle stammered, her entire worldview crumbling. But you look so—" She couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't voice the ugly, racist assumption that had guided her every action. "Known what, Brielle?" Angela's voice cut through her pathetic excuse like a surgeon's scalpel. "That you shouldn't hurl racist abuse at customers? That you shouldn't create a hostile environment for your employees? That you shouldn't physically assault a child?" "I was just protecting company property," Brielle whimpered, a final desperate grasp for justification. "Protecting company property?" Angela repeated, the question laced with a quiet fury more terrifying than any shout. "By terrorizing an 8-year-old girl over a 99-cent candy bar she immediately offered to pay for? Is that what you call doing your job?" Brielle's panic finally broke through her crumbling facade, the poison of her prejudice spilling out. "I thought she was... people like that, they usually... I didn't know she was your..." Angela took a step closer, her presence immense. Her voice dropped to a whisper that carried more weight than a scream. "People like what, Brielle? Finish the sentence. Tell everyone in this store. Tell my daughter exactly what you mean by people like that." The silence was her answer. It was absolute. And it was crushing. Brielle's mouth worked silently, a fish gasping in the sudden vacuum of her own making. No words came. Her prejudice lay exposed, a raw and ugly thing under the sterile fluorescent lights. There was nowhere to hide, no way to retract the venom that had already poisoned the air. And then, the dam broke. What had felt like a single, shocking crack in the store's foundation was revealed to be a network of deep, systemic rot. The full scope of Brielle's discrimination came pouring out, a torrent of suppressed truths. Destiny, the teenage Latina cashier Brielle had terrorized for months, found her voice first. It trembled, a fragile thing holding the weight of unspoken pain and anger. She's made comments before," Destiny began, the words catching in her throat. "Constantly. Always about customers and employees who weren't white. She told me I probably only got my job because of a diversity quota, that I should be grateful places like this were forced to hire people like me. She said I had to work twice as hard just to prove I belonged." The heartbreak in her voice was a palpable wound. This girl, working 2 jobs to get through high school, had carried this silent burden, terrified that speaking up would mean losing the job she needed to survive. Next came David, the Asian American assistant manager. Years of quiet frustration were carved into his features as he stepped forward. "She created a hostile environment for every non-white employee," he said, his voice low and steady. "She undermined my authority, questioned my decisions in front of customers, and made endless jokes about my heritage. She said diversity hiring was ruining the company, that real Americans were being pushed out." As he spoke, a visible relief washed over him. The release of a truth held captive for too long, for fear of losing his job, his ability to provide for his family. Then Frank, the elderly stalker, spoke. Decades of wisdom were etched into the lines of his face, and his voice carried the quiet authority of someone who had seen the long arc of history bend. "She tried to have me fired for helping Spanish-speaking customers," he stated simply. "She said I was encouraging illegals, and that we shouldn't cater to people who refused to learn English. She told me I was too old to understand how the invasion was destroying America. The cruelty of it, attacking a man who had dedicated his life to quiet acts of help, revealed the profound depth of Brielle's hatred. Even Mrs. Patterson, an elderly white customer and a Save Mart regular for years, stepped forward, her voice sharp with righteous indignation. "I've complained about her to corporate twice," she announced. "Apparently, it never went anywhere. She treats certain customers like dirt while being sweet as pie to others. I've personally watched her follow Black and Hispanic shoppers around this store like they were criminals, while completely ignoring actual suspicious behavior from white customers. Her testimony was a hammer blow, coming from someone Brielle would have seen as her own kind, with no conceivable reason to lie. The pattern was undeniable, a dark tapestry woven from years of deliberate systematic racism that had poisoned the store for employees and customers alike. Angela listened to every word, her focus absolute, her expression hardening from concern to cold resolve. When the last person had spoken, a heavy silence fell. She turned, addressing the crowd that had gathered. "This behavior does not represent the values of Save Mart," she said, her voice clear and carrying to every corner of the store. It was the voice of a leader who understood that words have consequences. More importantly, it does not represent my values. As a mother, as a human being who has dedicated her life to creating opportunities for people regardless of their background. She paused, her gaze sweeping over the customers who, just minutes before, had been cheering Brielle on. "I may have been born into privilege," Angela continued, "but I chose to work at Save Mart because I believe every single person who walks through these doors deserves to be treated with dignity and respect, regardless of their race, their economic status, their accent, or any other factor that makes them who they are." The contrast was stunning. A woman of generational wealth, dedicating her life to serving working families, while Brielle, from a far more modest background, had spent her time tearing them down. The consequences were delivered with the swift, clean precision of a surgeon's blade. "Brielle Hutchinson," Angela said, her voice devoid of all emotion, "you are terminated. Effective immediately. Security will escort you from the premises. You will never work for the Save Mart Corporation again. Your actions and the pattern of discrimination revealed here today are utterly incompatible with our values and will not be tolerated." Michael Torres, the corporate security chief, stepped forward, official termination papers already in hand. The efficiency of the response proved this was not Angela's first crisis, but it was clearly her most personal. Brielle was escorted out past the customers she had humiliated, past the employees she had abused, and through the doors she would never again enter. Her walk of shame was a silent, powerful spectacle for all who had witnessed her fleeting moment of power, and now her absolute downfall. But Angela was not finished. She was just beginning. "Effective immediately," she announced to the stunned store. "We are implementing mandatory bias training for all employees at every level. We are instituting a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination of any kind, with new, anonymous reporting systems for both customers and staff. And," she added, her voice ringing with a personal commitment that separates leaders from managers, "I will personally review every single complaint to ensure this never ever happens again. That is my promise to all of you." She then moved through the crowd, apologizing personally to every person affected, taking time to listen to their stories. But the most important conversation was yet to come. Angela knelt on the cold linoleum of the aisle, her expensive business suit brushing against the floor where her daughter's science supplies were still scattered. The image was powerful. One of the most successful women in America, on her knees to comfort her traumatized child. "I am so sorry this happened to you, sweetheart," she whispered. "Are you okay? Does your cheek still hurt?" Claire, this remarkable 8-year-old who had faced down raw hatred with more grace than most adults could ever muster, looked at her mother, her eyes a swirl of confusion, hurt, and a wisdom far beyond her years. "Mom," she asked, her voice small, "why did she hate me so much? I was going to pay for the candy. I always use my own money, just like you taught me. I don't understand why she was so angry, why all those people were cheering when she hurt me." Angela's heart fractured. She pulled her daughter into her arms, feeling the immense weight of having to explain the irrational poison of racism to a child. "Some people," she began gently, "let fear and prejudice poison their hearts. They judge people based on how they look, without knowing anything about them. That is their problem, baby, not yours. You did nothing wrong. You handled yourself with a grace that most people never find. You were polite when she was cruel. You were honest when she was accusing. I have never been more proud of you than I am right now." Together, they gathered the scattered supplies, the baking soda, the vinegar, the food coloring for the volcano project that had started it all. But they were no longer just simple items. They were now symbols of how knowledge can overcome ignorance and how learning can build bridges where prejudice builds walls. The fallout was swift, but the changes were profound. Within weeks, the video of the incident had gone viral, sparking a national conversation. But this wasn't just another fleeting outrage. It became a catalyst for real change. Save Mart rolled out the most comprehensive anti-discrimination training in retail history. Angela established a scholarship fund for underprivileged students in STEM, turning her daughter's trauma into an opportunity for others. When Claire and Angela returned to that same store 2 weeks later, they were greeted by David, the new store manager, promoted in recognition of his years of excellent service. The atmosphere was transformed. The tension was gone, replaced by a genuine warmth and respect. A large new banner hung near the entrance proclaiming a commitment to diversity and inclusion. It was a store reborn. But the story doesn't end there, and what happened next is almost unbelievable. Brielle Hutchinson's reaction to losing everything is about to take this story to a shocking new level. If you want to see what happened when Brielle decided to sue Save Mart and Angela Williams personally, claiming she was the real victim of reverse discrimination, you must subscribe to this channel. Her next moves will leave you speechless and reveal just how deep denial and hatred can run when someone refuses to accept responsibility for their actions. What do you think? Did Brielle get what she deserved, or was there another way? Let me know in the comments, because this story is far from over. Don't forget to subscribe, because the saga of Brielle Hutchinson is about to get even more unbelievable, and you won't want to miss a single moment.